Hello and welcome to episode 14 of Cold Case Christmas 2024. In this episode, we're going back to New Zealand for the second time of this year. In episode 2, we went to New Zealand to investigate the unsolved disappearance of little toddler Amberly Cruikshank. In this episode, we're going to Auckland and the disappearance of a 43-year-old man that is just baffling. This is the unsolved disappearance of Jim Donnelly. The year is 2004. Jim Donnelly was 43 years old at the time, and he was married with 2 children, Liam and Siobhan. His wife Tracy worked at Air New Zealand, while Jim himself worked as a process engineer. He was a scientist at Glenbrook Steel Mill, located just southwest of Auckland. Jim was a kind and considerate man. He was a brilliant scientist, but he was quite introverted, very private man. Sometimes struggled to understand social cues and had a tendency just to keep himself to himself at work. Yet his co-workers appreciated the organised way that Jim took his job. It was one of those analytical minds that you would go to if you wanted a problem solved. Things were going well for the Donnelly family. This is until June 2004, when Jim started behaving strangely, quite suddenly as well. Tracy said there wasn't a normal atmosphere in our home. There was something on his mind, and I really don't know what it was. Jim became increasingly stressed and withdrawn. However many times Tracy asked him what was wrong, he couldn't or wouldn't give an explanation. And then just out of the blue, he developed an intense interest in joining the Freemasons. He'd actually got an application form that was found in his vehicle after his disappearance. And this puzzled Tracy because she didn't know any Freemasons. She'd never heard Jim talking about the Freemasons ever before. But yet he seemed to have become obsessed. Really obsessed. He'd asked her twice to come home early from work so that he could explain why he wanted to become a member of the Freemasons. But we don't know whether that discussion ever took place, and if it did, whether it actually explained anything to Tracy about what was going on in Jim's mind. Days before his disappearance, Jim told Tracy that he had to attend an urgent meeting and that he'd rented out a suite for the occasion. She was perplexed. She said, "What do you mean, what meeting?" But he didn't elaborate. He just went off, and then when he came back, he couldn't say because it had disturbing implications. Crazy behaviour. You know, this guy is very methodical, organised, analytical, logical, and yet here he is descending into an increased level of paranoia with an obsession with the Freemasons. So was this just kind of some mental health crisis, and he'd focused on the Freemasons for some genuinely unknown reason? Or was there a reason for this? What was it? And did it have anything to do with his disappearance? People at work had also noticed Jim's behaviour change. They'd witnessed him being disoriented sometimes and nervous. Tracy spoke to Jim's best friend, Stephen. They'd known each other since the age of 5. Stephen also agreed that Jim was behaving in an uncharacteristically odd way. They all agreed that they'd sit Jim down and find out once and for all what was going on. On the morning of June 21st, 2004. Jim arrived at work. On his way, he'd called at a gas station and bought a muffin that was right there on his desk. He had signed into work, left the muffin, and then changed into his work uniform. Colleagues saw him at the lockers and then walking up a gantry, in a way like he was trying to hide from people, like he didn't want anyone to see him. And by 9 a.m, it was known by his colleagues that he was unaccounted for. he'd failed to show up for a meeting, which really wasn't like Jim. So co-workers kind of said, well, yeah, I've seen him. He was behaving strangely. And then, I saw him going up the gantry. And then another colleague said, well, I saw him, but I didn't notice anything strange. So it just so happened that Tracy rang his workplace due to an incident that she'd found out about the previous day, where he'd gone to the parking garage of a publishing company where Stephen, his best friend, worked. Whilst there, witnesses described him as disoriented and nervous, stated that he needed to find his friend to pay a debt. But Jim was trespassing and people didn't quite believe his story. And that's why Stephen and Tracy had that phone call. They got together and hoped to be able to sit Jim down. So, on the morning of the 21st of June, this was playing on Tracy's mind, and she rang his work to speak to him. And the person she spoke to said, well, we can't find him. He's not here. He was here, but he's no longer here. His co-workers started an extensive search of the mill. Tracy panicked, so the police were called. Law enforcement arrived and they found Jim's car in the mill's parking lot with his Freemasons application still inside the vehicle. Although co-workers had searched the mill, law enforcement went in and did a really thorough top-to-tail search of that mill and all of the surrounding grounds, but they couldn't find any hint of where Jim might have gone. They got sniffer dogs out, they combed nearby paddocks, waterways, bushes, beaches, and nothing. There was actually some boot tracks made with boots similar to those worn by the mill workers, leading into like a grassy area near a pond. That pond was thoroughly searched, nothing at all. And we don't know whether they were Jim's tracks or whether they've just been left by someone else, maybe looking for Jim. We just don't know. There'd been an early report from a witness saying that they'd seen a man running frantically across the street that morning, but that was determined to be someone else. They shut down the mill's furnace so that they could examine inside it. Nothing there. So by the end of that day, it was a complete mystery, but Tracy and the kids were just hoping that he would turn up. He had one of his bizarre episodes and he would come back as if nothing happened. Maybe gone for one of his mysterious meetings. But no, he didn't come back. Now, that night, a car was seen pulling into the mill's parking lot, right next to where Jim's car was parked. It was still there. However, when this mystery driver saw security guards, turned headlights off, backed out of the parking lot, and disappeared into the night. Interestingly, the mill's security cameras weren't working that night and therefore didn't record any footage of this mystery car. So were the security guards hallucinating? Why were the cameras off? Were the cameras regularly off? If this is the first time ever that the cameras were off, that's a problem. But that vehicle and the person driving it have never been identified. We fast forward 5 days. And Jim's hat, the hard hat that he wore in the mill, suddenly showed up beside an acid vat, a big vat of acid. His hat's just there, had Donnelly written on it. The police were convinced that that hat had not been there 5 days previous when they did a thorough search of that mill. It was not there, so someone put that there after the police left. It stood out and it was a thoroughfare, an area that people were walking past. Someone would have seen it. It's a big yellow hat with Donnelly written on it. And everybody knew that Jim Donnelly was missing. It looked very, very strongly to the cops that hat had been placed there. But it drew their attention to the acid vat. So they drained it. Now, it sounds really bad. It sounds really scary. It sounds like a thing from a horror movie. He could have fell in or pushed into an acid vat. But this acid was only weak. It wasn't like really strong. It's not going to be able to completely, you know, disappear an entire body. So if someone had pushed him in, or he'd fallen in the acid vat, he wouldn't have like completely dissolved. They would have found him in the acid vat, but he wasn't there. Then more items turn up. They found his work key, some cash, credit cards, his safety glasses, his library card, his work ID card, and a Palm Pilot at the bottom of the acid vat. If it's not dissolved cash, it's not going to have dissolved an entire human body. It looks like someone's placed those items there to make people believe that Jim had fallen in the acid vat and had been dissolved. What they've never found were his car key, his house key, and his watch. One of Jim's favourite possessions. His dad gave it to him. So how did Jim's items get into the acid vat? But more importantly, where's Jim? What's going on here? Well, there's various theories that have been put forward. Some people have thought, well, you know, he was having a mental health crisis and he's gone somewhere to take his own life. Well, okay, how far had he gone? On foot? Surely they would have found him. And how on earth did his items get in the acid vat and the hard hat next to the acid vat that wasn't there when the police searched the mill? Had Jim snuck in and put those items there himself to stage a disappearance, like thought, oh, after the fact, let's sneak in there and place these items, but how did he manage to sneak in with no one seeing him, and where did he go afterwards? Yeah, stage disappearance isn't out of the realms of possibility. It does happen. You know, people just want to leave, so they stage a scene. But why was that not staged from the outset? If that was Jim that did all that, you'd stage all that from the outset. You wouldn't just suddenly, 5 days later, have this hard hat appear, would you? It feels like foul play. To a lot of people, it feels like foul play. Tracy said, my opinion is that it does revolve round the mill. Something was happening inside the mill, and I think he saw something he shouldn't have, and it's gone from there. Did he find out something that the higher ups didn't want the lower downs to know? Were they intimidating Jim? Did he actually go to a meeting when he said he was going to this mysterious meeting? And he was like terrified. Did he actually meet with people from the mill? You know, with Jim being very analytical and logical, maybe if he had found out some kind of secret, maybe people were concerned that he'd keep digging and he'd find out more. I don't know. That's just my speculation. But the case is still open, and we're now 20 years down the line, and there is no information whatsoever. All the clues just went cold. There's been nothing for 20 whole years. Tracy says, I miss him so much. I miss him for me and for the children. They've missed out on so much not having him around. He would have been the most amazing father to them. That's the thing that upsets me the most, is that he was the most incredible dad. I miss having him here, talking to him. I wanted to grow old with him. 20 years and there's been nothing. His disappearance is as baffling today as it was on that morning of June 21st, 2004. Have you heard of this case? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye, guys.